been a few days since the dust has settled from the Triple Crown GT, which was played last weekend in Colchester in Essex. Fantastic weekend. The weather was good. We were in an old church hall, and the sun was beaming through the windows. And it's a really fantastic weekend. I really recommend it to anyone who is, hasn't been to a Warhammer Fantasy tournament before. If you love the game, get involved. Yes, it is competitive, but all the games are played in very good spirit. Just a lot of fun is had by all. And, everyone's just, if you really love the game, everyone's really involved, really cool armies to see. Everyone's talking about Warhammer all weekend. So I really recommend it. The purpose of this video is not to go through the sort of winners of the tournament. I'm sure the Triple Crown guys will release their own roundup of the tournament generally, but more to go through the games that I played specifically, and how my tournament went. I'm also not going to go through my army because I did that in the last video. So if you haven't seen that, maybe have a pause and go to my channel, go back to the last video. I went through the list that you can see now, and why I chose each unit and so on. 42 players in total there, all the different factions represented, and also mysteriously lots of Chaos Dwarves. It was funny because last year I took a Dwarf army to the GT, and I was the only Dwarf player there. There were no other Dwarves or Chaos Dwarves, and then all of a sudden there's lots of Chaos Dwarf armies, and I was busily looking up the rules beforehand to see what these things can actually do, and kind of grimacing to myself and seeing, oh yeah, what's this? Iron Demon, eh? Toughness 8, 8 wounds, unbreakable. Oh, okay. Oh, and your flame cannons are ranged 24 inch instead of 12 inch, eh? Oh, alright then. First time playing Lizardmen as well. For some reason I haven't played Lizardmen up until now, so that was very enjoyable too. So, the list is there, as you can see. It's all Khorne demons. It was my first time actually playing with this army in full. So I've played small games at 1500 points before, but I basically just got the whole army painted recently. So I was going into it without any practice games at 2500 points, and really just trying to pick up the army as I go along and see how it went. I had a basic strategy, of course, because obviously my army is very mobile. I've got the flesh hounds, which are very tough. Send them out in a sort of the vanguard of my army to engage with enemy chaff. I've got the Furies there to redirect charges and be annoying and get in the way, and then I've got the Blood Crushers to come in, and obviously the big horde of Bloodletters to mop up what's left. The Bloodthirster, of course, coming in where he's needed, and the Skull Cannons to try and take out those big targets. So that was the basic strategy. The Hellblades, which are carried by each and every Bloodletter, has Killing Blow, so hopefully that would be very helpful against any units of knights, character buses, anything else nasty with high armor that I could try and take out. We were also playing a few different scenarios. So games 1 and 5 were the battle line scenario. There's the Blood and Glory, the Watch Hill, kind of like Watchtower, where you use a hill instead of a tower, and this Hunt the Messenger scenario, where you had to select one of your characters to secretly be your messenger, who was worth more points to your opponent if they are slain. But I only have one character, so there's no guesswork involved for my opponent in that game, as you'll find out. The Bloodthirster was also the messenger. So with all the hustle and bustle of a tournament environment, I wasn't really in the swing of taking photos after each and every turn. So this won't be like my previous battle reports where I've gone into lots of detail. I want to just do a kind of brief overview of what was going on to give you a flavour of each of the games and how they went. So my first game was up against Callum's Dwarves. Now, I've actually played with Callum a few times, and I've played on the same side of his Dwarves with my Dwarf army. So I was kind of familiar with the models that he had, but I wasn't sure what type of list he would bring. And it turned out to be quite a sort of all-comer list with some big blocks of Dwarfs there and some war machines. So he was playing a typical Dwarf strategy where he was castling up at the back of the board, using some gyrocopters to try and redirect my charges and be annoying, trying to whittle me down before I got in there, and then relying on his big steadfast blocks to grind me down at the end. And what you can see there is just after sort of turn 1 or 2, where I'm sort of halfway up the board, trying to get to the back line where his dwarves are, and you can see one of the gyrocopters in the middle of the board trying to slow down my horde of bloodletters who are advancing up the middle. Meanwhile, my bloodthirster is hiding behind a building on my board edge, because obviously he's got a cannon and a stone thrower, both with runes. And I know from playing dwarves myself that if you've got a reroll on your cannon and a reroll on your stone thrower, they've basically both of them got a 50% or just over 50% chance of hitting each turn. So if you've got two of them, two war machines that can hit with strength 10 d6 wounds, you're going to get hit basically. So the bloodthirster was going to stay behind the building, and the rough plan in my head was to try and take out that cannon and rock lobber as quickly as possible, and then bring the bloodthirster out, and hopefully he would become relevant to sort of in turn 3 or 4, or later if needs be, to try and break down his blocks of dwarfs. My 2 skull cannons are not in the picture there because on turn 1 they both rolled a misfire, one of them blowing up and the other one not being able to fire this turn or the next turn, which would become a bit of a pattern over this tournament, as you'll find out later. It wasn't a problem getting into combat in this game because his army was pretty stationary. I was able to deal with the gyrocopters fairly quickly, but he had the Master Rune of Groth One Eye, which meant that he's had a 12-inch stubborn bubble. So it was very difficult to get through even his smaller units of Quarrelers and Thunderers, because when I won combat, he's still testing on a leadership 9 with a reroll. I made a huge mistake in putting my Blood Crushers into that building where his Thunderers were positioned. Obviously, dwarves are whistling down my units already with the gunfire. There's also Iron Drakes on the right-hand side of the picture, which you can just see the end of the unit. So my units were already depleted, and I foolishly thought that I could get all my attacks and my charge bonus when going into the building. I wasn't really familiar with the rules. It was the first time charging a building. And I had the Banner of Eternal Flame on that unit, and I knew there was one rule that I could get multiple wounds or reroll wounds or something like that, having flaming attacks attacking a building, which is true, but I don't get to attack with my beasts. The guys on top, the bloodletters, will dismount in order to enter the building and try and kill the dwarves inside, which meant that really I lost all my advantages in that combat. I lost my charge bonus, I lost my juggernaut attacks, and so I lost combat there. I also lost combat on the Quarrelers adjacent to them, which I charged in with a few Flesh Hounds and some Furies. Those Quarrelers had great weapons and they were stubborn. I lost combat there, and then took me a while I had to get the bloodletters in eventually. It was looking a bit better though on my left flank, where his warriors were looking a bit isolated. I was able to get my Flesh Hounds round. You can see them on the left-hand side of the picture, and those Blood Crushers would attack the flank, or the Flesh Hounds would attack the flank. So hopefully I can get a double charge on there next turn. I did manage to get rid of the organ gun with the Furies, but obviously they're in a bit of a tricky position to get charged by the warriors or something next turn. I managed to get the charge into those dwarf warriors, but it would take a while to whittle them down with my war beasts and monstrous cavalry not having enough models to break the steadfast. Well, sorry, you had the stubborn bubble anyway, and the bloodletters getting flank charged with the hammerers there, and then getting stuck lodged into those hammerers. It got pretty ugly, and I ended up losing 15-5. The Bloodthirster, I suppose, the biggest disappointment, because not being able to bust through those Quarrelers and get to the cannon and stone thrower at the back lines meant that the Bloodthirster was hiding most of the game. And I think we only got through 4 turns, I think, and therefore the Bloodthirster never really did anything. He didn't die, didn't give away his points, but obviously I was on the back foot for most of the game, and then had started off the tournament with a loss. Game 2 saw me up against Archie's Skaven, and I played Skaven once or twice before, but it's a kind of a strange one because Skaven was one of the armies I used to play back in 4th edition, and I sort of know all of the units well, but a lot of the rules have changed and evolved since then. So there's a lot I didn't know and had to get the rules explained to me. And of course, there was the addition of these big rat ogres with guns attached to them. Can't remember the exact name of them now. I think it was fiends or something. Big storm fiends. That's what they call storm fiends. And they've got these rattling guns which do something like 3d6 shots or something ridiculous. And he also had some sort of rocket launcher on one of them. He's got 2 cannons at the back there with 2 different models, but they are both just warpfire cannons. He had 3 units of slaves. He had a horde of storm vermin in the middle with some characters in it, including a warlord. He had a grey seer in a small protective unit of clan rats at the back next to the storm fiends, as well as lots of different chaff around. He had some scouting gutter runners that popped up behind my lines. He had some Jezzails in the corner. He had a couple of rat darts, and he had a doom wheel coming up the flank as well. So there you can see the deployment, and this is the Watch Hill scenario. So the Watch Hill in the middle is worth 500 victory points if you can get some fortitude onto it, so a banner or your general. Because obviously we're in a tournament scenario, and you've got 2.5 hours to play our game, it's quite likely that we won't get through all 6 turns, especially as it took some time, the deployment and explaining some of the rules and so on. So I deployed pretty much on the line, ready to take that hill as quickly as possible. Whereas Archie Skaven, as you can see, he's a bit further set back from that hill. Perhaps he's got a strategy that I don't know about. He wants to push the slaves up first and keep the storm fiends and the storm vermin behind. Maybe he's just a bit sort of apprehensive, intimidated perhaps by this big line of red demons in front of him. But either way, I was closest to that hill and keen to get onto that hill as quickly as possible. As you can see, I've got my big horde of bloodletters behind some of my chaff there, because I want to send those dogs, the flesh hounds and the furies, up beyond the hill to try and engage with his units, so I can move my blood crushers up the middle and get that horde onto the hill in turn 2 or 3. So that was the basic strategy, that was the deployment, and off we go. And on turn 1 I shoot both of the skull cannons, hoping to do some damage on these storm fiends or those cannons at the back. And what do you know? I roll a misfire on both cannons once again, one of them blowing up and the other one not able to shoot this turn or the next one. Really becoming a bit frustrating now in my first 2 games with a double misfire on turn 1. And of course, it's not just a chariot with a cannon on top, whereby the cannon can blow up and the chariot survives. It's the whole model blows up. So I'm losing my skull cannon on turn 1 to a misfire. But actually, as the Skaven turn 1 came up, and he shot his cannons and started to use some of his magic, what I began to find out is that he would actually start killing his own models as well. So it wasn't just me killing my own models, but the Skaven also had a pretty bad day at the office. One of his graces, his gracie rather, miscast and blew a hole through his clan rat unit. And one of his flamethrower teams rolled a 1 and scattered off and blew up into his storm vermin unit. Oh wait, no, sorry, I'm forgetting. It wasn't a miscast from his gracie. It was actually the plague spell, which went off turn 2 or 3, where he cast it in one of my units. I think he killed a couple of flesh hounds or something, but then the plague transferred to his storm vermin unit or something like that. Can't remember the rules exactly, but he ended up killing loads of his own storm vermin from his own spell, which was just, oh man, I kind of really felt for him there. But that was my sort of movement. As you can see, I'm moving up the blood crushers, ready to take that hill. I didn't go onto it full steam because I wanted to find out what these storm fiends do. So I was staying out of range. I think they had an 18-inch range, so I wanted to stay out of 24 inches because I was thinking he was going to move up and shoot them. He actually ended up staying put. So on my next turn, I would move up and take the hill, because obviously I've got to get in range of his guns to take that hill at some point. But once I found out his strategy was not to advance with his main blocks in the middle, I kind of thought to myself, well, as long as I can not lose these units, let's just go into range of his guns, see how deadly they are. I can always back up out of range of his guns and force him to advance towards me. There were several skirmishes on the flanks, the Bloodthirster charging the Doom Wheel and chasing it away, the Flesh Hounds charging these rat darts and beating them in combat. Those Jezzails proved a bit ineffective. They were taking pot shots at the Bloodthirster, but not having too much luck. The Skull Cannon at the back was trying to sort of stay out of range of this maraudering unit of Gutter Runners, which I don't have a picture of, but they were sort of marching up and throwing their slings or throwing darts or whatever they had. I was being particularly effective with the Flesh Hounds. Were able to go through these rat darts and sort of come around to envelop the Skaven army. And in the picture now, you can see how he's lost a lot of his Storm Vermin in the middle there. He would later reform into a smaller, more tighter unit, but he didn't actually advance forward with that Storm Vermin unit at all. Unfortunately, I don't have any more pictures after this, but basically my units in the middle moved forward to take the hill. They were losing wounds from the Storm Fiends, but none of them units were destroyed. And obviously my demon units are unbreakable, so you can't get them to flee via shooting. And I actually put my Bloodthirster into that unit of Skaven Slaves, which you can see on the right-hand side of his mid-block there. Obviously, those Skaven Slaves would be steadfast against the Bloodthirster, so it would take him 2 or 3 rounds of combat to break their steadfast and actually get through that unit. But from the way his units were positioned, he wasn't able to see the Bloodthirster's flank with his Storm Vermin or with his Clan Rats or anything. So I was happy just to put the Bloodthirster into those slaves and just get cutting through them, because once I get through them, I'm in his back lines and able to get to his Gracie. So I put the Bloodthirster into those slaves. I moved up to take the hill. The Flesh Hounds on the left side ended up engaging with some slaves as well. Oh, and I got lucky on the Reign of Chaos. So the Nurgle lended his assistance to the Khorne army and killed the Jezzails and killed the Gutter Runners with the Nurgle's Rot ability, which is kind of the only really sort of meaningful thing that happened with the Reign of Chaos all weekend. Actually, it tends to be a bit too random and pointless, that table, but perhaps I'll comment on that another time. And the game ended up finishing at a very low scoring game, so both of us got very minor victory points, just a few bits of chaff killed here and there, but the fact that I took that hill and my extra 500 victory points really swung it in my way, and I think it finished a 13-7 to the Demons, and that was the end of round 2. Round 3, I was up against Chris's Warriors of Chaos, and I was actually on the live stream table. So if you're on Facebook, you can follow the Triple Crown Wargaming page, and you can actually see live my game against Chris's Warriors of Chaos, because it was live streamed on Facebook. So that's my deployment at the beginning there. I deployed kind of. I wasn't quite on the line here, so this scenario was the Hunt the Messenger scenario. And obviously my Bloodthirster is the messenger, and I looked at Chris's army, and I'll show you it on the next slide, and it didn't really have any shooting, so I wasn't really in a rush to engage, because obviously I've got my cannons, so I kind of had the shooting advantage. So I was going to wait till the warriors sort of came to me. So I sort of deployed in the middle there, very spread out, hoping that I could try and get round the flanks of his army. Apologies for the bad picture there. I think the light is behind the camera, in front of the camera rather. But what he's got is a Chaos Chariot on the near left-hand side. There is a unit of 6 Chaos Trolls. Next to that is a Chaos Lord of Tzeentch on a disc, with all the tools. In the middle there, you've got 4 Skull Crushers, and then a Chaos Chariot on the right-hand side. And behind them, there's 2 blocks of Chaos Warriors. There's a Frenzied Khorne double hand weapon block of Warriors with a BSB in that unit. And there's a block of Nurgle Chosen. And I forget what the Chosen rolled up. But I think they had great weapons as well, if I can remember. No, they had halberds, that's it. They had halberds, Mark of Nurgle, and obviously they had +1 strength or +1 attack or whatever it was from the Eye of the Gods. So a very small, compact, quite deadly Warriors of Chaos army. Not terribly mobile, but obviously they've got that Lord on disc who's very mobile. So I sort of was hanging back in my deployment zone, waiting to see them sort of come towards me, trying to see what their strategy would be, and hopefully, if I can take out those chariots, perhaps with my cannons, I'll be able to get around the flanks of this army and go for the win. And there you can see deployment, and as you can see, I'm spread out quite wide. Turn 1 goes very quickly. The Chaos Warriors advance, just moving up. I managed to actually not roll a misfire on one of my skull cannons and take out one of the Chaos Chariots. Very, very pleased with that. I think I even took a wound off the other Chaos Chariot, if I remember correctly. But I was just really chuffed just to not roll misfires on my first turn. Oh, I forgot to mention, he also had Festus. Festus, the Leech Lord, or whatever his name is, in with the Chosen. And so he was trying to cast the toughness buff and the regen buff. And he would normally get one or two, or even both of those off each turn. Now, obviously, of course, the big downside with the Khorne Demons army is I've got no plus to my my dispel attempts. I've got no dispel scroll, so I'm really at the mercy of the enemy in the magic phase. If he gets good dice on the the Winds of Magic, he's able to get those buffs off. So the trolls advance, and he puts his Lord on disc right in front of them, right in front of my lines, within easy charge range. And I'm sort of thinking to myself, okay, so what that means is this Lord on disc is one of those unkillable mofos with like a 3-up armor save, re-rolling ones, probably a 1-up armor save as well, and 3-up ward save, probably a 1-up armor save as well, probably like Crown of Command or something. He's just going to be really deadly. But I thought, I've got to go for it. He's given me the charge with my Blood Crushers and my Bloodthirster if I want to. I'm probably going to bounce off him, but what choice do I have? Either I either go for it now, or I'm going to get trolls in my face, and those Skull Crushers as well. So I charge in with the Blood Crusher and the Bloodthirster. The Bloodthirster does a bunch of wounds, which are all saved by his ward saves. The Blood Crusher also bounce off him. They're in a challenge anyway. But obviously I win combat because I've got a charge and a banner. So I win combat by 2, and he fails his break test. And I think he just made a big mistake, really. He was out of range of his BSB because he's put his Lord on disc so far forward. Those Chaos Warriors just aren't able to keep up with the Trolls and the Lord on the disc. And he breaks, and I run him down, and I smash into those Troll unit. And just a massive sort of swing in the game there in turn 2, and things started to go my way from then on. I chaffed up his Skull Crushers unit, knowing that if he goes into my Furies now, he's then going to be drawn out the way, and I'm moving up my Flesh Hounds and my other Blood Crushers unit in a position to try and gang up on that Skull Crushers unit. And he takes the bait. The Blood Crushers and the Bloodthirster manage to finish off the Trolls in his turn. The Bloodthirster fails his check to restrain his pursuit, and ends up pursuing quite far though, so out of arc of those frenzied Khorne warriors, but sort of facing the wrong direction in the top left of the picture, as you can see. The Skull Crushers go through those Furies into a prime position to get charged in the flank by my Horde and charged in the front by my other unit of Blood Crushers. And now it's really starting to come together, because I'm looking at the board thinking, if I play this right now, I could actually sort of table his army, without giving away too many points. And that's basically what I went on to do. So that unit of Skull Crushers got the Horde of Bloodletters in the flank, and my unit of Blood Crushers in the front, and I was able to win that combat quite heavily. Meanwhile, on the other side of the board, on the left side here, I moved my other unit of Furies to chaff up his other frenzied unit, which was the Khorne warriors with the double hand weapons and the 4 attacks, and the Exalted Hero, of course, as well. And sort of manoeuvre my Bloodthirster behind to charge it in the rear where my other Blood Crushers backed up. So I was able to pretty much do the same as I did with the Skull Crushers on that other block of Khorne warriors as well. And it all culminated for me when the Exalted Hero issued his challenge. I accepted with the Bloodletter champion, who proceeded to roll a killing blow and lop off his head, which also gave me the points for killing the messenger. So once I wiped out that unit as well by getting the combo charge with the Bloodthirster and the Blood Crushers, there really wasn't any point in trying to engage with the Chosen. I simply maneuvered around and run down the clock. And so while that unit of Chosen survived, I managed to finish off with a 20-0. And on camera as well, on the live stream. So it was a very memorable moment of my weekend there. And that put me in a really good position for the Sunday, because I'd got the 1 loss and the 2 wins. So I was going into the Sunday with a very buoyant mood, and having totally smashed my expectations of what I would do with this army, because I was sort of coming into it with a themed army, quite a fluffy army that I hadn't really used before, at least not at 2,500 points, with no magic and so on. So really. At this point in the weekend, I was feeling really good going into the Sunday. So game 4, I'm up against Andrew's Chaos Dwarfs, and this was my first time playing Chaos Dwarfs, so I was really keen to see what they could do. Unfortunately, Sunday morning I wasn't really into the swing of taking pictures yet, so I haven't got any pictures of turns 1 or 2, nor do I have any pictures of his Kadai Destroyer. But you might have seen some of the pics, because he put some pics online recently. After the tournament, he had a kind of big dwarf statue with a massive hammer all on fire wading through the snow, which is a really cool model, and that was his Kadai Destroyer, which terrorized me on turn 1. So this was the Blood and Glory scenario, and obviously you're deploying 15 inches onto the table, which put that Kadai within charge range on turn 1. I must have been sort of still waking up at that point, because I didn't realise that I'd put my Bloodletter unit on the line, and that Kadai on turn 1 just went straight into my horde. So that was a bit of a problem. I also lost a couple of wounds on the Bloodthirster and a Skull Cannon to I think it's called Firestorm, or no, Flame Storm, Flames of Asgore, something like that. This Law of Hashut spell anyway, whereby you it puts down a template, you suffer hits, and you also have to do a toughness test or you die. Which was just terrifying, because I just unable to do anything about the magic. I was heavily outgunned in the magic phase. So sorry, I'm sort of jumping ahead there. So what did he have? He had a big block of Chaos Dwarf warriors, Infernal Guard, sword and board, quite a deep formation there. You can see sort of hidden behind the trees. 40 hobgoblins with bows. You got the Magma Cannon and the Deathstreaker rocket launcher behind. There's an Iron Demon on the other flank. The what they call Bull Centaurs sort of in the middle. Hobgoblin Khan on Wolf, and last but not least, the Sorcerer Prophet level 4 on Hashut, riding a Lamassu. It was my first time up against a Lamassu, and I found out that they're a level 1 death mage. So what he was able to do is fly this Lamassu around the board, doing little death snipes, pew pew, and he was able just to roll 2 or 3 dice on the caress or whatever it was, to just sort of see if he can get off the snipe. And if he fails and he doesn't able to get the spell off, then he just uses the rest of his dice on his Law of Hashut mage. There's also a level 2 fire mage hanging out with the war machines there. Anyway, I got this Kadai Destroyer really right up into my horde on turn 1. I'm suffering wounds from the death magic on my Bloodthirster. I'm losing my Skull Cannon turn 1 to the Flames of Asgore, whatever it's called. So I'm really sort of on the back foot straight away. But I do manage to get my Bloodthirster into the flank of the Kadai Destroyer, and combine with the ranks of the Bloodletter unit, eventually get through it 2 or 3 combat turns later, and take out the Kadai Destroyer. Meanwhile, I'm trying to push up my units to get to his lines, which are quite far back in the corner in front of his war machines. Meanwhile, he's got his Iron Demon on the other flank, and I'm trying to engage that with my Fleshhounds and see what I can do. With regards to his Sorcerer on Lamassu, I mean, this guy just flew around the table doing what he wanted, really. I wasn't really able to pin him down, and my Skull Cannons, very unreliable, misfiring as usual, unable to get him with a cannonball either. So having read the rules about this Iron Demon in advance, I was pretty scared of it, and I think you did a very good job putting it on the other flank of his army, because it kind of forced me to deal with it. Otherwise, I'd have this thing sort of steamrolling into my units. However, it's quite immobile, and even though it can move and fire, it can only charge in a straight line. So I was able to get these flesh hounds into the flank of it at one point. And my flesh hounds were able just to tie it up for a few turns, while the rest of my army sort of pivoted towards his lines in the top right. So that worked out quite well for me. I was also able to gang up on his bull centaurs in the middle of the board with the bloodthirster and my bloodletters, and take them out. However, it did leave my bloodletters exposed to a flank charge from his infernal guard, as you'll find out on the next slide. So with that unit of infernal guard into the flank of my horde, it was just a matter of time before they would be whittled down. So would that horde survive until the end of the game or not? However, on my right flank, I was having a little bit more success. I was able to take out that Hobgoblin Khan who was chaffing up my Flesh Hounds, and bring my Blood Crushers to bear on that Hobgoblin unit. Could I get through that Hobgoblin unit in time to get back to his War Machines and try and pick up some more points? I had this sorcerer on Lamassu flying around who was avoiding combat, just sort of staying within 18 inches to give the leadership to those Hobgoblins, but also manoeuvring around out of sort of charge arc of my units to really try and kill my Bloodthirster. And after fighting the Kadai, he was only down to 2 wounds, or perhaps down to 1 wound. I did end up charging him in the end to kill those Bull Centaurs, because I was able to get him into the flank and really do some real damage and finish them off. But he was still on 1 wound and he was still very vulnerable. I didn't want to give away the Bloodthirster's points because, of course, being my general, he would also mean I would lose my breaking point for the Blood and Glory scenario and give away loads of points. It was amazing because I actually managed to keep him alive until the end of the game. Even though, by the last turn, Andrew was throwing everything at him: Death Shrieker rockets, magma cannons, death snipes, all sorts of things, to try and get that last wound of my Bloodthirster because he was holding up so many points. I was also fortunate that the Bloodletters survived to the end of the game, which held up another 600 odd points. So there really was a lot of points on the line, which I managed to hold on to. And fortunately, after getting those Blood Crushers into the Hobgoblins, getting those Flesh Hounds in, and those Furies coming over the top to try and fight that magma cannon, I was able to clean up what was left of his army in that corner. I wasn't able to finish off or to do much damage at all, really, to the Chaos Dwarf unit or the Iron Demon, but because they had been separated from his sort of bunker in the corner on the hill there, I was able to finish off those Hobgoblins and the War Machines, which were a lot weaker, and leave his general, his Chaos Dwarf, and his Iron Demon alive. And so it finished off a 16-4 to the Demons, which I was really pleased with. I think Andrew was a bit unlucky on that last turn not to finish off the last wound on the Bloodthirster, but the sort of ward saves on the Bloodletters were, I was rolling quite good for those ward saves and stopped him from finishing off that unit. After playing Chaos Dwarfs for the first time, I can sort of see why now. It seems like a lot of their units are overpowered. They kind of have a bit of a mixed strategy, because they do have the ability to play like Dwarves, where they can castle up at the back, use their sort of War Machines and high toughness and ranks to play a very defensive strategy. But also, they've got lots of units like Kadai, and they've got monstrous beasts, and they've got flying monsters and magic and stuff, which are very tempting, and therefore they have a bit of a mixed strategy. So even in this game, you could see we had some units which were advancing towards me, and other units which are trying to castle up at the back, which I don't know. I tend to try and have an army which all has just one strategy, where the whole army is involved in doing a very offensive strategy or a defensive strategy or a different type of strategy, whereby the whole army is involved in that one strategy, because the last thing you want is giving your opponent the opportunity to fight half of your army before they fight the other half of the army, because then they can sort of gang up on you. But they've certainly got some really interesting units, and I think it'd be really fun to play Chaos Dwarves, because you can play them like Dwarves and really have some cool War Machines and really tough units, but also you can throw in some monsters and magic to the mix as well. So that was really enjoyable. And with that win there, that put me up onto table 4 for the last game. So I was doing really well at this point, and sort of thinking in the back of my mind, oh God, well, this is going to be my final reckoning now on game 5. If I'm up on a high table, I'm going to be up against a really tough army. And it turned out to be Will's Lizardmen. So the Lizardmen from left to right on game 5 battle line, you can see one unit of skink skirmishers. You've then got a Stegodon. There's also a Scarvet on Cold One somewhere behind. You've then got the big horde of Temple Guard with the Slan on High Magic Lawmaster in the middle, followed by the Ancient Stegodon with sharpened horns, of course. Another horde of the Saurus warriors, another Stegodon, more skink skirmishers, 2 blocks of them, and also a skink priest knocking around somewhere on Heavens. And that's the whole table. Now, you can see on my deployment there that I've got in the middle, I was quite lucky in the sense that I had more drops than him, and I was able to kind of react to his deployment because he put those blocks down quite early. And I was able to put my Blood Crushers in the middle and my cannons behind them, as you can see. My Fury's also there, ready to sort of fly over the top and try and make sure I get the charge off. And I put my horde to one side. I thought to myself, well, look, I'm not going to go head to head with the horde of Bloodletters against the horde of Lizardmen because I'm just going to lose. But if I keep them to one side, perhaps I can get my Blood Crushers in the front, and I can bring that horde round the flank eventually, because his left flank, my right flank, was just 2 blocks of 2 sets of skink skirmishers there, which I was going to try and rush with my flesh hounds early on, and hopefully I can get round that flank. I also put the Bloodthirster on my right flank behind that building there to try and keep him alive until I get those skink skirmishers off the board. They're not hard to kill, but I don't want my Bloodthirster getting near to them because they've got lots of poison and they can do multi-shots too with the blowpipes. And I think there were some other blowpipes kicking around on his Stegodons or something like that. I'm not too familiar with the rules, but I know that they have big blowpipes as well. So I just wanted to keep my Bloodthirster alive. He was yet to die this tournament, unbelievably. And I thought, well, can I go the whole tournament by keeping him alive? We'll see. So I had a bit of success on each flank by marching up my flesh hounds and able to engage those skink skirmishers early on. Will got first turn and moved those skink skirmishers up and fired some blowpipes at me. He got the stand and shoot when I charged in, but those flesh hounds actually surprised a lot of people with how tough they are, and they were able to see off the skink skirmishers on the flank, and they ended up overrunning into a Stegodon. Now, I knew I wouldn't win that fight against a Stegodon, but the fact that I got the charge meant that I might be able to not lose many casualties in that first round and try and tie up that Stegodon for a bit, and which would hopefully dissuade his big horde from getting too aggressive early on. I was able to do the same on the other flank, so those skink skirmishers came up, and I was able to charge the flesh hounds in to finish off one of the units quite early on, but not before his first magic phase. He cast a big scary walk between worlds via the skink priest on one of the skink skirmishing units, which just teleported this unit behind my lines, so they were in a position to just throw loads of poison darts at my Bloodthirster and take a couple of wounds off the Bloodthirster as well. I did have the gift that allowed me a 2-up ward against the first wound suffered in battle, so I was able to shrug off one of those wounds, but he ended up 2 wounds down very early on. And the flesh hounds would later clean up that last unit of skink skirmishers, and thank God I had those flesh hounds, because I didn't want to pivot my whole horde of Bloodletters round to deal with that little unit, so I ended up just trying to ignore them, moving my Bloodletters up to continue with my original strategy, and luckily those flesh hounds were able to turn around and go back to get those skirmishers that were in my bottom corner. In the middle of the park, things were pretty cagey because I was keeping my lines quite tight, moving up not too far. Obviously, I don't want to get into range of those Stegodons. And of course, I wanted to try and kill them with my cannons. Now, the cannons were abysmal. I did take a few wounds off I pivoted both my cannons towards that ancient stegodon, and I did manage to get it down to 1 wound, but I didn't manage to kill it all game, and that would be particularly frustrating, as you'll find out in a moment. So once his Lizardmen had got close enough, I went for it. And when I say went for it, I mean I moved up those Chaos Furies in a position to kind of chaff up his 2 big blocks. I moved up my Blood Crushers behind so that whether he charged those Furies or not, I'd be able to charge him on my next turn. The Bloodletter unit was getting destroyed by Fiery Convocation. Turn by turn, they were just losing lots of bodies. But luckily, I did manage to keep that unit alive until the end of the game, because they get a 4-up ward against Fiery Convocation. So not loads of them were dying each turn, but I was just unable to dispel. I just kept throwing dice at this spell, unable to dispel it all game, and it just ate through that whole horde turn by turn. I did manage to get the Bloodthirster into one of the Stegodons, as you can see on the top right of the picture there, and eventually get through that Stegodon. But the Ancient Stegodon in the middle, down to 1 wound, still in a position to be relevant in the game. And what Will did quite cleverly is he ended up pivoting that Ancient Stegodon back to his backboard edge there, where it was sort of facing my Bloodthirster, but also facing his Saurus Warrior unit. So if I came in, I would have to make a decision whether I went after that Ancient Stegodon or not, because otherwise he'd be able to charge my flank if I went into those Saurus Warriors. He ended up, and I wasn't sure why he did this in the end, but he ended up not charging the Chaos Furies. Perhaps he thought, well, quite rightly, that they would sort of get in my way more than they would get in his way. But I was surprised he didn't just go into those Furies and kill them, and position his Stegodons in a way that they could react to that. But I was managing to hold up his other Stegodon on the left-hand side with those Fleshhounds, which worked out quite well for me. So I don't have a final picture of how things turned out, but the Bloodthirster went into the side of those Saurus Warriors. The Blood Crushers went into the front. The Chaos Furies got sort of trapped in the middle there, but I managed to get quite a few of those Blood Crushers in. I had a choice of charging the Ancient Stegodon and suffering a stand and shoot with its big blowpipes, which would probably have taken off those last couple of wounds of the Bloodthirster, or risk the Ancient Stegodon charging into the flank of the Bloodthirster after the Bloodthirster had gone into the Saurus Warriors. I chose the latter because I still had 1 Skull Cannon left, and I thought, well, this Skull Cannon can take off that last wound of the Ancient Stegodon. All I need to do is not roll a misfire and roll a 2-up to wound him, right? Easy, right? But then, of course, I end up rolling a misfire, the Skull Cannon can't shoot, and I end up losing the Bloodthirster to a charge from the Ancient Stegodon on the last turn. And it was he went out with a big roar. It was the first time he died all weekend, and it was quite poetic, I think, the way it turned out. The climax, the best point of the game, the highlight of the game for me actually, was this Scar Vet on Cold One, which is sort of a very tough character, which was quite fast, coming round behind my lines there. Actually ended up charging into the rear of my Skull Cannon, and the only problem is with this Scar Vet is he's only initiative 2 or something like that, and so the Bloodletter on top of the Skull Cannon just turned round and chopped off his head with a killing blow before he got to strike, which I just thought was fantastic, because you got the model of the Skull Cannon is a fantastic model where these Bloodletters are like high up on the model, like riding on the back of it behind the cannon, and you can just imagine this massive lizard charging the rear of it mounted on a Cold One, and this Bloodletter just turning around and just swinging his massive Hellblade, and his head just flies up into the air. But I ended up breaking that big unit of Saurus Warriors and defeating it, and then losing my Bloodthirster. And then that's pretty much how the game ended. And it finished a 10-10 draw. This was a really enjoyable game, actually, because Lizardmen had lots of magic. I was really unable to dispel much of what happened. And it was interesting to see the strategies he used. The Fiery Convocation, while it is a fantastic spell, my ward save magic resistance was just invaluable. keeping that Bloodletter unit alive. There was only a few of them left at the end of the game, but obviously they still didn't give away that extra 600 points. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyable game and a great end to the weekend. So when all was added up, I ended up coming 9th overall out of 42 players, which I was just so amazed with. Losing one game, winning 3, and then drawing my last game. Miraculously, the Bloodthirster survived 4 out of 5 games. I have no idea how that happened, because obviously he's only got a 5-up save and a 5-up ward. The Furies, I thought, really did the business. You know, their leadership 2, all they do is they get charged and they die. But the fact that they fly means that they can, get deployed where you need them to. They can redirect charges and get in the way, and they really helped me do that, and I really was able to use them quite effectively. They're strength 5 on the charge as well if you give them the Mark of Khorne, which I think is quite good. And obviously I give them the Mark of Khorne primarily because that's how they can use the Bloodthirster's leadership as well if they are, within range. But it didn't really come into play over this weekend. And I also took units of 6 of them, which I think, obviously you only need to take 5. I think the unit of 6, obviously the 6 models come in the box, so that's why I chose 6. But I also think it's quite good because, if you're charging a war machine or something, you just need enough of them to survive to take out that war machine. And I think, I was able to do that on a couple of occasions against an Organ Gun and against a Magma and the Chaos Dwarves. And so just having enough bodies there so they can get in the way, redirect charges, kill a war machine if they have to. The Furies were fantastic. The Flesh Hounds were also fantastic. Now, there comes in at 180 points for 6 Flesh Hounds, and they actually surprise a lot of people. I think people see those hounds, and mentally they're thinking like Chaos Warhounds, they're thinking chaff unit, they're thinking it's got 6 models, therefore it's got 6 wounds, and they're thinking, I should be able to get that off the table pretty quick. Once they find out that these Flesh Hounds are toughness 4, 2 wounds each with a 5-up ward save, and, that they're just really tough, hard as nails chaff, or chaff killers, I think it surprised a lot of people. A few of my opponents didn't realise they had 2 wounds each. They were able to hold up a Stegodon in that last game. They were able to hold up an Iron Demon in the game previously. So those Flesh Hounds really smashed it as well. The Blood Crushers, I really enjoyed taking those 2 units of Blood Crushers. They're not the best units in the game, but again, obviously they're good against big units of infantry. They're fast. I always got the charge. I don't think those Blood Crushers got charged once during the whole tournament. They always got the charge. And coming in at strength 6 with those Juggernauts, they were doing the business as well. The Skull Cannons were terrible. Absolutely terrible. They misfired every single game. As someone who is a Dwarf player and is used to having rerolls on artillery, they were better at chariots just charging in to get a few impact hits and a few extra attacks than they were with the cannons. The cannons were absolutely abysmal all weekend. The Horde of Bloodletters wasn't very effective. But I didn't really have big expectations for it. I mean, if I was facing against armies that have are heavily armored cavalry, for example, heavily armored infantry, where I could really make use of the killing blow, or characters where I could make use of the killing blow, then perhaps I would have had higher expectations for that horde. But to be fair, they didn't give away their points very much. I think actually only in that first game that I lost, they gave away their points. For the rest of the tournament, they didn't give away their points. And that's what counts, right? Because obviously you got a big horde. It's those, 630 points or whatever it is that I was keeping each game. And of course the Bloodthirster was cool as well. I mean, the Bloodthirster, it's more sort of for kind of the fear factor when you take a big Bloodthirster, because your enemy sees it and thinks, I've got to get it, I've got to kill it, I've got to get it off the board. And actually perhaps they'd be better off focusing on other things. Well, I say that, but the Bloodthirster, he's not that good on his own, to be honest. He's very vulnerable on his own. And of course, because you can pop him through combat res with the demonic instability rule, he really needs to have some support when he comes into combat. The times when he did get into combat with some support, he did really well. So I'm pleased I had him. The army as a whole was +4 on the comp score. I think really that's quite low in a sense for the army. It could easily be a higher plus. If I just split up that bloodletter unit into two units of 20 instead of a big horde, it would be +7. I think my strategy was quite sound. Being a very mobile army, I was able to pick the right charges, double team the right units, and come off well against there. The magic defense obviously is the big weakness, and that really showed on the games on Sunday against the Lizardmen and the Chaos Dwarfs, who just really had a lot of magic. And I really got lucky to get off some decent results there and get a draw against those Lizardmen. I think the main weakness, the main weakness is the magic, but the main problem I would say with an all Khorne army is that they're just really overcosted. Bloodletters at 14 points a model. They're just really overcosted. They've only got one attack. Their toughness 3. They're not on par with other units that are 14 points a model. They're not on par with Dwarf Hammerers or White Lions or whatever. I think they should be a bit cheaper. They should be more on par with like your Grave Guard. I believe are about 11 points a model. The Blood Crushers are something ridiculous, like 65 points a model. They're more expensive than the Empire Demogryph Knights. The way I would fix, in inverted commas, the way I would boost an all Khorne army. If you look at the Daemons of Chaos book, the Nurgle units, the Tzeentch and the Celestial, if you look at the lore attribute of those spells, right, they're able to summon more Pink Horrors, summon more Demonettes, and summon more Plague Bearers by casting, with the lore attributes of those spells. Whereas, of course, because Khorne don't have any magic, they don't have a way of increasing the size of the Bloodletter units. They have no way of summoning more Bloodletters. Well, obviously they do if they roll a 6 on the Reign of Chaos, but there's no intrinsic way of bolstering, of getting more demons into the fray. If there was a way of doing that, I think that would be pretty cool, and I think it would match the fluff as well. I mean, if you read the Bloodletter entry there, where it talks about the Hellblaze, it talks about them, for every kill they make, they kind of get more frenzied. And I think if you had some kind of tally or some sort of way in which the more kills you get or the more killing blows you get, the more bloodletters you get, something like that, they could do it in a cool way. I think that would sort of rebalance the Khorne army. I was quite lucky during the tournament. I didn't roll the Slanesh one once on the Reign of Chaos, which is quite deadly for Khorne, and I think it's an 8 if you roll it, and it's the worst one on there, and of course it's the one that affects my whole army. And luckily I didn't roll it once the whole weekend, so that helped me a lot. That's the whole army that I've got at the moment. There's a few more models that I'm working on. I'm working on a skull throne, a blood throne. What do you call it? Blood throne? Yeah, with a herald on the blood throne, which is just a really cool model. Not very competitive, but I think it would be cool to try out a hatred bubble and to see if I can get that to work. I also want to paint up a soul grinder. That's the word. Soul grinder, to try and test that. And try and do a couple different lists, but I think I will just keep it all Khorne, as opposed to getting some demons from other gods. But all in all, thoroughly enjoyable tournament. Really amazed at how well I did in some of the games, and once again, if you're new to the tournament scene, I thoroughly recommend it. Obviously, there are people there who are fixed up a kind of cheesy list based around a special character or something to try and really catch you off guard and win all their games. It's a tournament, but all the games are so enjoyable. Everyone's having a really good time, and so I really recommend it. And Triple Crown is the place to go for that. Thanks for listening, guys. Leave a comment if you're so inclined, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye bye.